As we are the UK regulator for data protection, you'll forgive me perhaps if I start with a UK issue here. We're pleased now to see that the government has confirmed that the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, will apply in the UK from May 2018, 25th of May. That was the statement made by the Minister, Karen Bradley, and it was also echoed by Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State, along similar lines. Now, that gives us a level of certainty, and it gives you a level of certainty in your preparations. Longer term, obviously, there is something of a question mark. The post-Brexit situation remains undecided, but I don't want to speculate about that this afternoon. I don't think we need to go there. I think our task really is to focus on the GDPR and on the things that we should be doing and that you should be doing in order to prepare for the new situation. Now, the GDPR, we would suggest, does represent a step change in terms of data protection. In three main areas, I would suggest: transparency, control, and accountability. There are new provisions in that which we can distinguish from the laws that we have in place at the moment under the directive and the DPA. And I think those very much go to some of the themes which we've heard about already in the opening remarks, as we'll see as we go on. Now, first of all, transparency. There are new requirements in the GDPR in terms of the information which data controllers will have to make available to people when they're processing their personal data. So the requirements to have transparent and easily accessible policies written in clear and plain language, but also at the same time to have more detail in those privacy notices. And also a requirement on data controllers to only process the minimum data that they actually need, that is necessary in order to carry out the particular activity they're doing. Secondly, in terms of control, we're seeing now a more explicit element of customer control, of control by individuals, by the data subjects. And again, this is a point which has been alluded to, I think quite rightly in the opening remarks, the importance of the user control. So we're now seeing the explicit introduction of the right to be forgotten, as it's being called. In other words, the right for people to have personal data erased under certain conditions, if it's no longer necessary for the processing in question, if they withdraw their consent, or if the retention period, which you've said is appropriate, has actually expired. Also, we're seeing the right to data portability, which I think is an issue which I think may be particularly important in the telecoms, the mobile industry, and in certain others. But now we're seeing that people will have the right, in certain circumstances, to receive their data, the data that they have provided to you, in a format which means it's portable, it's reusable, and so they can keep it or they can transfer it to other providers. Again, that applies in certain conditions if the basis of the processing was their consent or a contract. Thirdly, accountability. There's a much greater emphasis now on data controllers, on yourselves, to demonstrate your compliance with the requirements of the GDPR, to keep records of the processing that you're carrying out, and also to put into practice data protection by design and by default, which means carrying out, where necessary, data protection impact assessments to look at the risks to privacy that may be involved in your processing and to put in place mitigation measures to deal with those risks. A requirement to designate a data protection officer in certain circumstances, and also references in the GDPR to codes of conduct, which can be developed by industry bodies, but then there are requirements about compliance with those codes of conduct. So again, that's a role really for industry to develop those rather than ourselves, but there are some teeth in the GDPR to deal with that. and also certification mechanisms, which also will be available. Now, clearly, there is more in the GDPR than I can hope to cover in the limited time that I have available. So I can only flag up some headline issues, which you obviously will need to research and probably are researching already. I think it's important to note that there are a number of concepts in the GDPR which are not defined in hard terms, in some black letter terms. A lot of the conditions depend on issues like risk, large-scale processing, significant or legal effects of processing. And we're doing work in terms of our guidance to try to define those terms, but that is something which will evolve through practice. Bear in mind that there are new requirements about breach notification. There are obviously, as you all know, the possibility of increased fines by the regulator. The GDPR, of course, applies uniformly across the EU, so there are issues there about the consistency of how it's applied, I think, in different countries. And finally, there are some territorial issues which I think would need to be examined. I mean, for example, the GDPR explicitly applies to organisations outside of the EU who are processing data which affects people within the EU, again, within certain conditions. So there are a number of issues here which really need to be bottomed, if you like. Now, what are we doing about this? How are we helping you through this mass of new policies and new issues? We've produced a document on preparing for the GDPR, 12 steps which we think organisations should be undertaking now, essentially. Now, I don't want to go through all of those 12 steps. Again, you can download the document from our website. It gives some useful practical guidance. What I would pick out, I think, in particular in this context is our recommendation to carry out an information audit to understand what personal data you hold, how you got it, what you're doing with it, who you're sharing it with, so a basic information audit. And I think it's important that you understand, in that case, the real basis for your processing, what actually legitimises your processing of that data. Are you relying on consent? Are you relying on contracts or some other condition? That will become crucially important as we move into the GDPR in May 2018. And also, I think, linked to that, you need to be reviewing your privacy notices. Again, something that was mentioned earlier on. What are you telling people about your processing already, and what will you need to tell them when the GDPR comes in? Because it's very likely that you will need to give them more information than you are at the moment. So I think as a good practice point, you need to be thinking about how to convey that information in a way that people can understand and that is meaningful to them. Okay. There are obviously a number of other good practice points which the document deals with, but I think that gives you perhaps a flavour of it. Okay. As you know, we produce quite a lot of guidance, and we have a number of other tools. We've published an overview of the GDPR, and this really gives you the main elements of the GDPR and highlights some of the main differences from the current regime. That we see as a living document. It will develop over time as we approach May 2018 into a more fully fledged guide to the regulation with more detail in key areas and links out to other guidance. We're also reviewing our current guidance. As you may have noticed, we published recently a version 2 of our Code of Practice on privacy notices, and that includes GDPR content and some indication of requirements under the GDPR. So we're refreshing some of our existing guidance, but we're also producing other pieces which are GDPR specific. Now, the thing to bear in mind here is that it's not just us. At a European level, what's called the Article 29 Working Party, which is the body representing regulators like ourselves across Europe, have a crucial role because it will turn into what's called the European Data Protection Board in 2018. So that has an explicit role in producing guidance for data controllers. And at the moment, they're already working on a number of pieces of guidance. Now, obviously, we're fully involved in that. We're contributing to that. And we're helping to draft some of those things. But the timescales are not completely within our control, as you'll appreciate. But at the same time, there's no point in us duplicating things which they're working on. So there are a number of pieces, as are indicated on the slide, which you can expect to come from the the Article 29 Working Party within the next few months. Pieces on, for example, data portability, on the need for data protection officers, on data protection impact assessments, and a number of other pieces. We are working on ourselves on a number of other areas, as indicated on the slide, where we think we have something to contribute, something to add on that. Okay. So look out for that guidance appearing in the next, over the next few months and in the run-up to May 2018. Okay. But I'd like to just finish really with by referring back to this key issue of trust. The statistic there is one which came out of our own surveys, but it's something which I think is suggested by a number of other recent surveys really to do with this issue of consumer trust. And I think I would endorse the comments that were made earlier on that, in that context. Now, obviously, it's not just a question of compliance. There's a key role here for the development of ethical standards, ethical frameworks. And there's sort of interesting developments, I think, within industry to do that. But at the same time, compliance and in particular the GDPR have a key role in supporting that and are key to that issue of developing and building trust. So I look forward to the discussion later this afternoon. Thank you very much.